The worst thing we could do is try to take lessons from podcasting and apply them to YouTube. Podcasting is the worst discovery tool. The way they organize episodes is tragic. It's hard to find content. If you get, like me, 250 episodes, my listeners are hard up to figure out, like, where is the show that's for me, right? Where's the episode that was really just about email marketing or just about Instagram? The searching through that to figure it out and scrolling is terrible. So why would I use podcast, which is the worst search engine, period, to determine how I should act on the best search engine, which is YouTube, right? I'm going to take the best practices of YouTube and adapt my podcast to it, not the other way around.
I want to talk about video podcasting specifically, because this is the Engage Video Marketing Show, and you've hinted about the benefit of using video content in your podcast and so on, and we'll dive deeper into that. But, you know, I'm thinking back, video podcasting, it used to be a thing. You know, you used to be able to do like video podcasts on Apple and so on, and then it wasn't a thing for quite a long time, and now it's a thing again.
The thing that I think is true no matter what is that video, we know, is an engaging medium. But from a podcasting perspective, depending on the format, like two guys doing a Zoom call isn't always the most interesting thing to watch on YouTube, right? But what started to happen? Well, people who stepped up their game and said, what I'm going to do, I'm going to build a studio, like either your independent studio, or I'm going to start doing in-person interviews that still, it's the same content, but it looks better. It's engaging because you get to see them interacting with each other. You get to see their body language, and maybe the conversation changes because they're in person with each other. Things started to evolve in that way. And now we're starting to see that that's the modern day talk show. YouTube podcast is the modern day talk show. So it's pretty common for guests to realize they're going to fly into someone's home studio or a studio in their city to have an interesting conversation, to go talk to a thought leader who's built the audience. And now that's become the standard practice. So what happens, I think that these channels all chase each other. You know, they're playing chicken, trying to figure out what's the next big thing. Like YouTube went with shorts. It's the long form video player. You don't have to compete, but they went with shorts. And what did TikTok do? Well, they're starting to go longer. You know, they're introducing 10-minute videos on TikTok. So is Twitter. Twitter is introducing 10-minute video. Yeah. All of it is trying to compete and gain share, because at the end of the day, they want to go with what the audience is willing to watch. So what am I doing? I'm trying to figure out, how do I create shorts that capture the people who are trying to watch shorts? How do I create videos that then also translate to Reels and TikTok? And then how do I create in a way that's not a drag, right? I don't have to create a separate video for TikTok and for YouTube and for Instagram and for shorts versus long form. That's a pain in the butt. So I take my interview, just like we record it here. I try to make it as engaging as possible. But then I look at the editing process and I say, what makes sense for YouTube, for a YouTube podcast? And for me, for my show, it's not going to be the full 45-minute interview. For me, it's going to be 10 minutes of that interview cut down that follows one train of thought, right? Because I cover lots of things in my conversation, but there's usually a great 10 minutes about one thing that is search friendly for a place like YouTube. So when someone's on YouTube using it the way that they do as a search engine, looking for a how-to piece of content, that aligns really well with how I create content. So if they've on the latest hack on how to create a short, I might have covered that in one of my interviews, and I created 10 minutes just about that. And then I'm in competition with the people who are doing it solo. You know what I mean? So I look at both. I create solo content and interviews. It's not just an interview show, but just as an example, that's how I think about these platforms, is they're kind of playing chicken with each other. And it's my job to see, what can I create that the audience is going to be interested in? So like even with my editing, how can I create the first 3 minutes to be amazing and engaging so that they're sucked into the content, and by minute 3, they don't care what it looks like. They just want it to be as good as the first 3 minutes was in terms of the conversation. So those are some of my thoughts.
I'm interested to get a little bit tactical with you here, Brandon, because relatively recently YouTube has made a real push into video podcasting on the YouTube platform. And even rolling out the podcasting tab on channels. You can check out youtube.com/podcasts to kind of see the podcasts that YouTube's recommending to you. And these are long form conversations. They are long form episodes with a video component to them. What you're mentioning there around repurposing your longer form video version of your podcast into, say, 10-minute YouTube videos, I think if I'm interpreting you correctly, that's different to like publishing your full YouTube episode as a podcast on YouTube. Do you see the distinction there, or is it a bit too early in the way you're experimenting?
No, it's not a distinction. So YouTube doesn't care how long your video is. Like in podcasts, I think what people are doing is they're being lazy. They just want to take what they have in podcast and put it onto YouTube. And that works if you are already popular. If you already have a huge fan base that wants to listen to you Joe Rogan style for 3 hours, or even, a more popular regular celebrity or whatever that has a show that for an hour, they love you. They don't care. They will listen to anything you put out. Great. The rest of us are competing. All right. And just 1 second before we go on to the rest of the show, if you like what you are hearing, please make sure to hit that subscribe button or the like button or both. It helps the show grow, and it shows our show to more people, helps us grow, helps us stick around. Thank you for doing it in advance. Now back to the show. The rest of us are competing. We're competing against everything else out there. YouTube is only showing, like, especially in their actual podcast page, they're only showing the biggest creators. You're not going to show up there unless you are in the search. So if you're in a relevant search, you can show up as a podcast there. And what they're doing is saying, okay, classify this content as a podcast, because we realize people are searching for podcasters on YouTube now, and we want to be able to serve them up through all the muck and mud that is what you're competing with on YouTube. So they wanted to give us a tool. So we get to self-designate, hey, my content's a podcast. It could be 5 minutes. They don't care because there are 5-minute podcasts. So it's just a self-designation. You literally create a playlist and say, these are my podcast videos, and you click, this is a podcast. It asks for a couple little things like some keywords, a description, and a square piece of cover art. And from then on out, if someone searches for the name of your podcast, you'll be pulled out of the muck and mire to be served at the top, so people can find your show by name, because that's how people search for podcasts organically. Yeah. So if you've built a following and they want to find you, that's a way to do it. So I think it's really semantics, and maybe they'll start to change things and figure it out. But right now it's just let me volunteer myself to show you that this is a podcast. I still think me doing the extra work of creating 10 minutes of something that is really impactful, and that the headline of that show is very specific and not super vague, like my talk with Ben, right? If I'm like, Ben and I chop out like what is happening right now with Google Podcasts, that's a very specific thread that someone might watch just that video to figure it out. So that's my approach and perspective.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess the decision comes down to, what's your podcast strategy on YouTube versus your podcast strategy on other channels or other platforms, right? Because typically in a iTunes, Spotify, your podcast feed, you would have sequential episode numbers, and one episode would be one interview, one topic, one guest, whatever. But the way you're considering that podcast feed on YouTube is you could potentially have 3 videos marked as a podcast or in your podcast playlist from the one longer form episode that on another platform. Am I interpreting that correctly? Is that the way you're looking at it?
Yeah. Well, think about this, because there's still episode numbers and my playlist is still in order. So it will say, let's do this conversation. It would be like YouTube podcasts with Brandon Birkmeyer, episode 150, right? And then it would say shorts and short form and how to repurpose from podcast to short form with Brandon Birkmeyer, still / episode 150. It would just say the same episode number a few times, but it would have specific subjects. I think that I'm giving myself a double opportunity. And if people want to watch the whole thing all together, I could put that out there too. Right now, I don't think that that's as relevant and they can go listen to the podcast, if they want to listen to that piece. But that is something I'm debating right now. I could see, do I just put the whole episode up as well? Like all three or all four? I could. It's not something I choose to do right now because in my mind, that's not something someone wants to watch. I don't think they want to sit here on YouTube for a full hour. I think 10 minutes is pretty much what they've already proven is what their audience behavior is. So that's my approach right now. But yeah, I'm testing, I'm trying things out. And I think I try to be intuitive about what seems like will confuse people versus won't.
Yeah. And I think your thinking around that is the right way to think about it, because at the end of the day, on YouTube in particular, it's about creating content that audiences want to engage with and want to engage with a high level of retention. So it's not about just sticking content up and marking it as a podcast and saying, well, YouTube wants podcasts. Well, here they are. Here's my podcast. It's about what does the audience actually want from you? And I think, I like the way you're thinking about it, but
okay,
me,
actually,
I'm still figuring it out.
Yeah, well, let me mention this because, you spurred an amazing thought, which is just the worst thing we could do is try to take lessons from podcasting and apply them to YouTube. Podcasting is the worst discovery tool. The way they organize episodes is tragic. It's hard to find content. Like if you get, like me, 250 episodes, my listeners are hard up to figure out, like, where is the show that's for me? Right? Where's the episode that was really just about email marketing or just about Instagram? Like the searching through that to figure it out and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling is terrible. So why would I use podcast, which is, the worst search engine, period, to determine how I should act on the best search engine, which is YouTube, right? Yeah. I'm going to take the best practices of YouTube and adapt my podcast to it, not the other way around.
Yeah, I think that's a really good distinction there. So, thanks for sharing that. Hey, just in closing here, Brandon, I just want to ask you a question and give you one sentence to answer. Should our listener start a video podcast in 2023? Got one sentence.
They would be irresponsible to not start a podcast in 2023 if they don't have one. They would be leaving money on the table, leaving influence on the table, leaving business on the table. So yes, that's not one sentence, but they should start a podcast.
3, but that's okay. We'll take that. Brandon, I appreciate you for coming on and sharing some wisdom, some insight, and hopefully some inspiration for people to get out there and create their podcast if they haven't yet.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Brands on Brands.